We have breaking news out of Washington, D.C. The Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle has resigned. Now, as you know from the show we had on yesterday, and if you've been paying any attention to the news at all, there was some fireworks on Capitol Hill yesterday in congressional testimony where Cheatle went up there to try to explain what the nature of the investigation has resulted from the July 13th assassination attempt on President Trump. She had hardly any answers at all. People on both sides of the aisle continued to say she should resign. She kept saying that she was not going to. She was going to continue on. But then today, we have actually just moments ago, we have information that she has actually resigned, as you see from these headlines here. She has stepped down, and now then we're going to continue to find out exactly what happened here, because as a lot of people have been saying, she's not out of the hook yet. There was a particular engagement. I'm going to show you some of the other ones and what's led up to why she's making this decision to step down. Maybe she wants to get out of the heat, but I don't think it's going to work out that way. Let's see. Nancy Mace, Representative Nancy Mace, had one of the more noteworthy exchanges with her yesterday. First, watch this.
Okay. Is the Secret Service fully cooperating with our committee?
Yes.
Okay. You say you're fully cooperating with this committee. On July 15th, this committee sent you a list of demands of information that we wanted. Has the Secret Service provided this committee a complete list of all law enforcement personnel that were there that day? Have you done that? Have you provided a list to the Oversight Committee? Yes or no?
I will have to get back to you on that.
That is a no. Have you provided all audio and video recordings in your possession to this committee, as we asked on July 15th? Yes or no?
I would have to get back to you.
That is a no. You're full of shit today. You're just being completely dishonest.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman,
I want to.
Come on.
We have to maintain decorum in this committee. No matter.
Yeah. So you see, it just went downhill from there. And there was several others that a lot more fireworks happened on top of that. But today, Nancy Mace, when she heard about the resignation, said, well, if you think you're going to get out of the fire, you might want to rethink. Here's what she said.
If the Biden administration wasn't going to fire her, I'll take her resignation. That's the next best thing. But we were willing to force a vote on it, put people's sentiments on the table, and let the American people see what we're made of. People want action. You can still have her. We can still have her subpoenaed, even though she's resigned, to appear before different committees, judiciary, or before the Senate and other committees who are continuing this investigation. She can still be compelled by law to show up and answer questions, even though she's resigned.
So we'll see. But whether it's her or somebody else, if anybody thinks that this is going to get the issue off the table, or that these same questions are not going to still be demanded and that people need answers, I think that they're gravely mistaken. We'll see what happens from that. But I want to kind of go back and get a little bit of a running start here of what led to this resignation. Now, listen, I'll just tell you, I've been in a number of very stressful situations over my military career, especially when I was on active duty, sometimes life and death situations on the front line fighting, and then other kind of things dealing with high-ranking people when there were things going on. I did some investigations, obviously much lower level than this kind of thing, but I actually had to engage with seniors who were not very happy, especially when it was doing an investigation of one particular time of a tank rollover in Germany, where I was stationed at the time. So I understand that there can be a lot of pressure on you to get the answers that everybody wants to know, especially if there was fatalities involved. And I've had a few of those, and I do have some sympathy for Kimberly Cheatle. But that sympathy is tempered, because we're not just talking about some major like I was at the time in the Army or a lieutenant colonel. Those are relatively low level. When you're taking that reins of that top job, that has to come with the understanding that you could be in the heat that like few others will experience. And if you can't take that heat, if you can't operate under pressure, under fire, then you don't need to be in that position, whatever her situation. You can just see on her face that she was just anguished over all of this pressure and the things that she had been facing. And it started before the time on the floor of the House of Representatives there. This is actually from, I think it was July 17th at the RNC convention, a place where she probably didn't think she was going to take heat. But 3 U.S. senators cornered her, tried to press her for some information. Then she tried to escape, and this happened. Wow, it's hard to imagine what that must have been like. To have literally the senators of the United States Senate chasing you down through what you thought was a safe place was kind of nerve-wracking. But it didn't get any better at the hearing, which was yesterday, which was supposed to be the first of many. And as Nancy Mace said, it's still May. She may be subpoenaed to come back as well, but I think there'll probably be some better people to do that. But listen, let's look at what led to not just her resignation here, but many calls for her to be fired after yesterday's testimony, and some of them were pretty valid. Here's one where one of possibly the most central questions that need to be answered publicly about what was found at the site of the assassination attempt, where the gunman was. Watch this.
Did they share with you how many shell casing were on the roof?
Yes.
Okay, how many were there?
I would refer to the FBI for their
How
investigation
many were there?
and their information that they need to share in their investigation.
So they've shared the information with you. You just don't want to share the information with us, correct?
We have concurrent investigations that are going on.
So they have shared this information with you. You know the answer to the question. You just refuse to answer the question.
Let me tell you why that's such a big deal. Because according to what everybody is saying, especially within the government, the shooter fired 8 shots. And then you heard a 9th shot, the kill shot that came about 10 seconds after the last of the 8 shots that were alleged to have come from the gunman. But there, and go back and watch our show yesterday that we had on this issue. It's on the video tab of our channel right now, and you can see it, where we specifically take a look at what the forensics show, what the audio recordings show, and then even the physical evidence of where different bullets may have struck, shows that there's a likelihood that there were 2 separate weapons used in attacking President Trump. So if there were 2 separate weapons, then there's not going to be 8 shell casings on the ground where the shooter was. And you can see that she probably didn't expect, Cheatle probably didn't expect to have that question answered, because when the Representative McClain asked her how many shell casings were found, you could see her face. She froze for a second, like, oh, shoot, I can't give this answer. If I do, it's going to open up a whole can of worms. And she's going to be right there on, national television. And she didn't want to go down that path. So she just said, I'm not going to tell you, which is pretty amazing that you're there under oath, subpoenaed by Congress. They ask you one of the most relevant questions: was there a second shooter? Because if there's not 8 shell casings, folks, if there's 5, and that's my guess is that there were 5, possibly 6, actually. Because 5 or 6, because I'm reasonably sure, based on the evidence that we have at this point, that the first 3 rounds were fired by someone else, someone that was stationed somewhere else, that was probably in a similar line of sight to where Trump was in that shooter, because those even sounds like somebody who knew what they were doing. They were methodical. Bam, bam, bam. It's somebody who is experienced in knowing what they're doing. Whereas the second 5 were just bam, 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 bam. 5 or 6. I'm sorry. It depends on what the actual count was on that. But it was someone who didn't know what they were doing, who's just squeezing off rounds. Anybody who knows, if you're wanting to be a sniper, you don't shoot off that many rounds because you can't get a clear line of sight. You can't get a good target picture, because when you pull the trigger, you have the recoil from the rifle, and it takes a second or 2, even for an experienced shooter, to come back on the target and then slowly pull the trigger so that the round goes on target. And somebody who doesn't know what they're doing For example, someone who was not good enough to make a high school shooting team isn't going to know that. And it's probably just going to think it's like a video game where you just squeeze off rounds as fast as you can. So that's why it is vital to know how many shell casings were found on that roof, because if there were only 5 or 6, if there weren't 8 or 9, then you have a real problem and you have confirmation there was a second weapon used. So that's one of the questions. I don't know what else people are going to be asking. There's lots of other things that need to be ascertained. But to me, that's the first one. That's one of the most important ones, because that's where the investigation needs to go. And if they have this information, if the FBI has this information, you need to know about it. We need to know ASAP right now, before this thing gets, any further down the road. I don't want this getting swept under the rug. I don't want anybody saying, other events overtake it. They start talking about campaign or God knows what. We need to know how many shell casings were there found on the roof where that kid was killed. That's the first thing. Now then, back to some of the specific problems with the Secret Service itself. You have this curious situation regarding the recordings that were or were not made.
Depending on the detail, radio communications are recorded.
Does the Secret Service have recorded communications from the July 13th event?
We do not have radio communications from that day.
But you have text messages?
We do have emails and text messages.
Emails, okay, great.
So why would they have, and just put yourself in the position here, why would the Secret Service be so cavalier that some days they would record things, some days they wouldn't? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Either you record things or you don't. There's no value. There's no reason to sometimes not record things and sometimes record things. You go to all these different sites for the candidates. It's routine. It's normal. You have standard operating procedures. So it stands to reason that it's most likely the case that if you do sometimes, then you're going to do it all the time. Because there's a reason why you do it sometimes, so that you have a record of what happened, so that if anything occurs, then you have evidence that could find out, what went down and when, and all those kinds of things. There's a good reason for having it. The question is, was there a good reason for not having it on July 13th? And that's what's, opening up more questions here, because one of the first things we said, if you watched our coverage of this when it first happened, we're asking the question, what was known by whom? So as we've talked about before, there were 2 counter sniper teams, one on the north side on a barn, and one on the south side of the platform on a barn. Initially, the north team was oriented to the north, the south team was oriented to the south, because if you don't know what the threat environment may be, you have to be prepared to operate in an almost 180-degree arc. It's certainly something like this. So you have all the likely or potential locations where a sniper could be located. You've got coverage over that. Apparently, there were 2 other teams elsewhere on the grounds as well, but you had the north and south covered. But a couple of minutes, at least a little over 2 minutes by some reports, the southern team suddenly picked up its orientation from the south and reoriented to the north. The obvious question is why? What did they hear? What were they told over their communications gear? If we had the recordings, we would know. We would know for sure. But see, that gets into some other problems here, because when Secretary Cheatle talks yesterday about, we knew 52 minutes, according to what she told Representative Boebert, 52 minutes before the speech, that there was a suspicious person. Okay, so then she's asked a series of questions here about the difference between suspicious person and a threat. This definition is important. Watch what happens next.
For the Secret Service, for an individual to be determined to be a threat, that individual would have to be seen with a weapon or capable of doing some sort of harm to our protectees.
I mean, Director, an individual walking into a rally with a rangefinder, scoping out an unprotected rooftop, and he reportedly flew a drone over hours before. It sounds like a lot more than suspicious, especially at a presidential rally.
And then she went on to that to talk a little bit more about the details of the differences between suspicious and threat and when that happened here.
When did he transform from suspicion to threat? Because they're treated very differently. People can be suspicious, but they're not a threat until a certain point in time. So when did that happen?
I believe that it was seconds before the gunfire started.
Seconds.
Okay, well, we know that's not true. So now then we're having to get into a situation. We don't know one of two things. Either she's lying, she knows the right answer and she's not giving it, or she's woefully unknowledgeable, doesn't know what happened because maybe there was no time. One of the other things she was asked, you know, how's, I think it was Marjorie Taylor Greene, where's the timeline? And she didn't provide one. So she's saying, how can you come to this conference 9 days after the fact and not even have a rough timeline of the things that happened? Because that would have given, and again, perhaps this was part of the reason, that would have given you ample opportunity and evidence to say, hey, hang on a second. Why is it that these guys repositioned 2 minutes before, not seconds, as you say? What were they told? Because if you say they only had seconds to do it, but yeah, we know at least more than 2 minutes, somebody on that roof knew something in the north was going on. We also know from many on the ground witnesses, which we have shown in previous episodes where we've talked about this issue before, a bunch of people were screaming, pointing up to the roof, saying there's somebody on there. There's a gunman. They have phoned video of the guy. You can clearly see him from the ground, not from an elevated position. There were policemen all over the place. The guy had been noted since at least an hour before, nearly an hour, that there was a suspicious person. So everyone should have been looking for him. So why did none of that happen? I mean, those are the questions that still need answers right now. And whether, Kimberly Cheatle Director Cheatle has resigned, that shouldn't even slow down the requirements for answers. And again, folks, this needs to come quickly. Now, one would hope that President Biden, wherever he's at right now, would be behind this and saying, hey, we need answers. When she resigned, obviously it was coordinated with the White House because they immediately issued a statement. In fact, Gary, if you can throw up that, this is what President Biden actually said here. He said, Jill and I are grateful to Director Kim Cheatle for her decades of public service. She has selflessly dedicated her and risked her life to protect our nation through her career in the United States Secret Service. We especially thank her for answering the call to lead the Secret Service during our administration, and we are grateful for her service to our family. As a leader, it takes honor, courage, and incredible integrity to take full responsibility for an organization tasked with one of the most challenging jobs in public service. The independent review to get to the bottom of what happened on July 13th continues, and I look forward to assessing its conclusions. We all know what happened on that day can never happen again. As we move forward, I wish Kim all the best and plan to appoint a new director soon. So, I mean, it's nice that you want to wish her well, but honestly, there's a time and a place for things. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of one of those, you got to read the room kind of a situations here. And when she has just resigned because she did a horrific job under pressure in the House of Representatives during that hearing, when she gave plenty of things that were either contradicted by the evidence, unwilling to give any kind of information, continued to hide behind this claim that we're going to do a 60-day review. We'll come back with answers then. It's only been 9 days. And folks, listen, 9 hours after this thing happened, there had been a pretty good accounting from the top, from the people who were in charge on the ground up to her. I mean, a pretty thorough accounting of what actually happened. And then to hide behind 9 days later, that's a real, that by itself is also an indication that like you're trying to hide something. When you're not answering how many shell casings were used, when you're giving inaccurate information that's self-evidently untrue about the timing of certain events, when you're not explaining why the Secret Service, whose only job there was to protect the former president of the United States, 52 minutes after seeing somebody that was designated as suspicious, that had a rangefinder, that had other information that other people, multiple people saw, to include other law enforcement, and to give the excuse that he melted away into the crowd and that was the end of it. That's just inexcusable, because either it's weapons grade incapacity that you're just incompetent to do your job, and not her specifically, but all of the team on the ground, that they would allow someone who was designated as a suspicious person to melt into the crowd and there not be a whole team of people looking for him. That's another question. Why did then no one go after him if he, quote, melted into the crowd? I mean, there was a lot of people there. I've seen a lot of the videos from the pre-stage period of time when people were coming in and all that. And it was a lot of chaos and a lot of people. So it wasn't going to be an easy task, but especially if you have the guy's description and he wasn't in, wearing colors that would easily blend into the crowd, like, a MAGA hat or red, white, and blue or any of the patriotic things, because everybody was wearing it. So it'd be hard. This kid had khaki pants, I think it was, and this kind of this light blue or a grayish kind of t-shirt and long hair. That's something that you can find, because that's not real common that was there. So if you were looking for this guy, you probably could have found him. So even though Director Cheatle has left the service here, the questions need to not only not go away, they need to intensify. So someone else better be designated as an acting director today, this day, not any time later. And these questions need answers right away, because just like she has had access to these things, so does whoever's in charge, even in an acting capacity today. I would not let any grass grow under this. I would not say, yeah, let's let this person get a chance to come on board and, maybe a week or two from now we can get it. No, I think that they need to continue to demand answers immediately today. And I'm not, that's not rhetorically. I mean, literally this day, I want answers to those questions. They have the answers. She admitted that they have some of these key answers and they're not giving it. The American people deserve to know right now what is known about this assassination attempt. This is not one of those deals for national security. We need to keep things under wrap on these fundamental issues, because a presidential candidate that hundreds of millions of people or tens of millions of people voted for last time and that is polling really well right now, they deserve to know what happened, who was behind this, what was going on. If there was more than one shooter, we need to know about it. And I don't want to see any more of these reflexively news reports come out in some of the major media that, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. There was no second shooter. It's been debunked. Nothing's been debunked, folks. Nothing has been debunked because there had been an investigation. You can't debunk something unless you've investigated. And when there are credible evidence that something untoward happened, that something unusual happened, that there were different acoustic signals, that there were two separate batches of fire that clearly sounded different, that were clearly fired by someone different. And when you have all these entry points and other people that were wounded in the crowd, and you look at the line of sights and some match and some don't, and then you look at the fact that the kid didn't have the capacity to do this, that all screams, hey, we need to look at this with go through this with a fine-tooth comb. We need to look at this with a magnifying glass, every aspect of this, because there are some evidence that there was a second shooter, and the Secret Service, FBI, all these folks owe it to you to find out exactly what happens and to chase all the leads down wherever they may lead. And that means also looking with the fine-tooth comb into the operations of the Secret Service, because, it's possible that you can combine on the ground incompetence with somebody else trying to do something nefarious. So I'm not necessarily saying that the Secret Service was in on some sort of, conspiracy or something. They may not have been. I don't know. But it's also possible that there could have been some people, whether the organization as a whole is a separate issue, but there could have been some people that were involved in some way in something that's just not right. And we need to find out. So she's resigned. We're going to continue to follow this. And that's okay as far as it goes. Many people were calling on her to be fired, not just to resign. That's one step. But folks, the rest of the people in that organization need to be held accountable, and they need to provide answers with it. We know they have. And that's where we are today, folks. By the way, come back in about an hour and a half. We have, speaking of this, President Biden, we need to know, should he still lead America? We got Doug McGregor on, who's going to be talking about some very interesting aspects of this situation as that one's going on, because all this stuff with the Secret Service is under the shadow of the fact that President Biden withdrew from the race. And now the question is is he capable of continuing to be president? And we're going to look at some of those factors this afternoon, and you'll be probably surprised at some of the things you learn there. Don't miss this. 1 o'clock today, Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We will see you then.